go into things with a little bit of a different mindset. You know, be self-aware. You need to know yourself in order to be able to interact in a community of diverse people.
So I thought it would be a good idea, since it's the beginning of the school year, just to talk about censorship in general. And we're going to go through the presentation next week about media law. So does everyone realize that at a private school we don't have First Amendment rights? We talked about that, right?
Yes.
Because we're not a branch of the government. But even though we don't have First Amendment rights here, we're lucky because we pretty much have been able to publish almost everything we've ever tried to publish. And administrators are always open to meeting with us if we ever have, you know, something that's controversial or just maybe even just an important issue that we want to cover. So that is a great thing, because they could just say, no, you can't write about that, and it could be game over before we even start. So we are lucky that their doors are always open to us. But I thought it would be a good idea just for Mr. Vogt to share maybe his thoughts on why he doesn't censor like he could, maybe just his thoughts about First Amendment and how he sees it working in an environment like Ravenscroft. And then just jump in with any question, make it more of a conversation. Don't make Mr. Vogt just sit there and talk at us, please. It's uncomfortable.
That's pretty good. I can do that for a while. Yeah. You know, I mean, it's funny because that word censorship seems, or to me feels, really powerful. Has a huge negative connotation. I don't ever want to see myself as censoring a student's voice. I'm a big believer that this high school is your high school, and that we teachers and administrators are here to support, obviously fulfill the mission of the school, but to support your experience, your growth, your learning, and you know, I feel like the newspaper is your voice, and really in a lot of ways the voice of the students. Sometimes you all tackle touchy, controversial topics, and you know, I think the only time that, from my perspective, I feel like I've ever stepped in to talk to the editors in terms of an approach that they were taking was when I felt like, one, the article was inaccurate. A quote of mine was taken out of context, or the context changed between when the interview happened and the newspaper went to print because of a major school event. And so now this quote seems incredibly inflammatory, pulled out, when at the time it really wasn't at all meant to be. Or if I feel like the argument is just flawed, or what is being talked about isn't a representation of who they say or the authors say are being represented. So I don't think I've ever said no to an article. I think we have worked with to tweak a quote or two here to say, you know, that's really not a fair representation of what I said, or what Mr. Billerman said, or what Dr. Perry said, or what some students said. Yeah, I mean, this is your paper, and you know, I'm hoping to fulfill your voice and your vision in this paper, and it comes out accurate, you know, and reflective of the community. I mean, there's been some negative things in there. I mean, I think, you know, we're trying to make the school experience a great experience. We're not trying to be big brother or big sister and meddle in your private lives, but we do have roles there to play as members of a community. And so sometimes when there are issues that happen on campus that, you know, people say, why are you messing with our lives? So there's a lot of information that people don't know and can't know because it's confidential. And so to report it in a certain way is just sort of inaccurate to what we're trying to do as a school. So just ask me questions. I mean, you heard Emmy and Austin, and I feel like, you know, there were enough things that happened there last year where that relationship, from their perspective, turned into pretty adversarial. I wouldn't say that's fair to say that that's how I felt necessarily, but I think they did a great job in many, many ways, and I think you guys will do a great job too.
I'll just throw some out there, but so for example, with the situation well, when Emmy was editing the paper, I believe it was the junior year of the CCL article. Was that her junior year?
Yes.
So that article specifically, that kind of thing, I've only read the edited version that came out. But with something like that, what would go into the decision that says, hey, this part should be taken out or tweaked? Like, I know you mentioned that oftentimes it's about, or most of the time, if not all, it's about making sure that someone's voice is heard correctly. So what, in your eyes, was incorrect about, or somebody was being misrepresented?
Right. I think in that one, even Emmy in the interview said, well, that's true. I think, if I remember correctly, and that was a while ago now, it was all juniors hate this. When, I think Emmy and Stephanie and there were some pretty vocal folks who didn't have great experiences with the program. At that point, it was the Change Your World projects that we were just trying out for the first year, and it didn't go great, right? But certainly some people had great experiences doing it. But I think the voice that came through was that everyone hates this, and that wasn't necessarily true. But I don't.
The other major flaw was their original headline said, I can't remember it actually. I don't even think I have a copy, but it said something about CCL in general, and it made it sound like the entire student body did not like all of CCL, and really what they were talking about specifically was the junior class and the Change Your World project. And so that was really inaccurate, and that did need to change. And that's one thing the administrators said, that's a misrepresentation of actually what the article says, and that was true. So Emmy says that in her video too. She said that was true.
Gotcha.
Misrepresenting the whole student body, because that's not what it talked about.
And if you know the iteration, I think from my perspective, I've been to a number of conferences where you meet with presidents of higher ed institutions, folks who are professionals out in the world, and when you ask them, what's missing in the youth that come through, or what characteristics or traits of students do they want to see on their college campuses or also in their organizations, it's all about folks who are culturally inclusive, who can sit in a room of diverse people and work together and collaborate and communicate and have vision and think about the world in different ways. And if you look at the competencies of the citizen leader framework, that's all there. Who can argue with, you need to be resilient as a kid, right? Something bad happens to you, you have to bounce back, right? You need to go into things with a little bit of a different mindset. Be self-aware. You need to know yourself in order to be able to interact in a community of diverse people, right? If you don't know yourself, then how can you possibly begin to understand everyone else's perspective? So this is all great. Now, how do we implement that, right, to make it real for you all? And probably the most cynical group of people in the world are high school students. You question things, and that's right. It's natural. It's where you are. And we're not going to get it right. Right? We tried these Change Your World projects. How can we make this cool? How can we make it real world, hands-on, where you can actually get in and do something? And it came across to the students as, you're just adding more work. And in our old schedule, where there was no free time, and common period used to be free time. That was the perspective of those kids, right? When they were freshmen, common period was like, do whatever you want. And then it's like, wait a minute, now I have this program, and now I've got homework for it? No. And that feedback to us was great, right? And that was part of what that article, I think, was sort of was feeling. Like the kids were frustrated. And so we are adapting, too, as a school to figure out, okay, how can we make this real? And so to bash the whole thing because of one class's experience with something that's going on, or even more classes, can do damage to what we're trying to do here as a school, right? Does that make sense? And what we're trying to do is great. I think the same thing with the Speak article last year, or the editorial that pretended to be the voice of the whole board when we figured out it wasn't actually the voice of the whole board. And I thought there were some quotes in there that to me at least came across in a way that I don't think they had intended. Who can argue with creating a more inclusive community here where people feel welcomed and supported? I hope nobody can argue with that. And so I don't want to do damage to those efforts in creating a better community here at Ravenscroft. And so if the tone of an editorial, whatever, is flawed in such a way that it really does detract from some of the great things we're trying to do, that's when we'll sit down and talk and say, hey, what are you trying to get at here? And understand from our perspective what we're trying to get at as a school. How can we come together and represent this? And you can question, right? And you can talk about what needs to be better. But there's sort of a balance there, right? Does that make sense? So that's when you'll hear feedback from us. You can talk about the latest movie that came out any way you want. I don't care, as long as you don't put any swear words in there. Overly suggestive. It's the real important issues that I think we need to represent, how they're actually impacting you all in an accurate way.
Trying to think of the best way to phrase it, but do you think that the administration, besides you and Mr. Billerman, who read these papers as a review, do you think that they see it as censorship, or just seeing it as a way to prevent anything sounding bad for when people who come to visit the school could possibly see and be like, oh, no?
That's definitely a lens through which I've looked at some of these articles last year, for example. I think I definitely said that in a meeting, like, God forbid somebody comes on campus and reads this, what do they think of our school? Because I don't think the article, as it was written, was a fair representation of our school. I think it painted in an extraordinarily negative light around certain issues, and I didn't think that was fair. So I think, I guess I don't really know what your do we view it as censorship?
When it's just being reviewed. Like when it's just being read but nothing's really brought up about it, do they see it as censorship? Or are they just seeing it as we're just going to politely read this before it's published?
I think she's talking about the difference between saying, no, you can't run an article, and prior review, which under the legal definition, prior review is considered censorship.
Gotcha.
And I think is that what you're trying to say?
Gotcha. I
can't word.
That's okay.
No, unless you're familiar with the legal definition of censorship, nobody's going to view proofreading your paper, essentially, right? Just taking a look at the content before it comes out as censorship. But I guess obviously it falls in the legal definition. But I don't see it that way. I'm not going through with the intent of saying, no, you can't do this. I've got a lot of mistakes in the time. It's a tough job. It's a lot of work. You guys are busy. It's always great to have another set of eyes on things from a different perspective. And when I'm quoted, I like to have the ability to review what's being written about me. Because you don't get that in the real world. You look at celebrities and people who are out in public, and if you've ever been quoted, I don't know if you've been quoted on the football field, an article written about you or the team, and like, well, I didn't say that, or that is so far out of context, because you don't get the opportunity to review that in life. And that's pretty tough for folks. And headlines that CNN will run to get people to read the article that have really inflammatory compared to what was actually said by whoever was being interviewed. Mm-hmm. I think, case in point, I don't know if you guys are following this, the St. Paul's School. Do you know that school? It's a boarding school in Concord, New Hampshire. It's probably the third best high school, and over Exeter or St. Paul's. An unbelievably great high school. This kid was accused of raping, I think it was statutory rape, but a 15-year-old at the time, sophomore when he was a senior. And it brought to light a whole culture of just kind of yuckiness at St. Paul's. But the article, the headline was, "Accused Rapist Lies," or admitted he lied in court, something like that. Now, if you read it, the lie that he said was, "I lied to my friends telling them that I had sex with this girl." But that headline grabbed you, and it didn't really seem to represent the idea that was in that article. And it was pretty awful either way, but it's just sort of interesting how that happens. And I would hope that we would stay away from something like that.
Yeah, that's a constant criticism of journalists in general, taking things out of context to make it seem more sensational than the news actually is, and that's something you want to avoid.
I will, for the record, say I did not make one suggested edit to the article about censoring high school newspapers.
Good move.
I was censored, and my article that's title was censored.
That's another headline.
Yeah. So, called me a lot of things.
Yeah,
Dumb isn't one of them.
And yeah, that was a big, if you saw it, that she used reverse type, white letters, censored. And she wasn't censored in that article, but she explained it in the subheadline. But yeah, she was not censored at all in that one. Anything else? No?
This feels weird because it wasn't our topic.
Yeah.
Because I feel like Emmy and Austin would have had like multiple questions, and yet we're just walking into this.
Yeah, but it's a new year, and so we need to start fresh and, going forward, understand how we can work together.
Where they were going with it, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think too, one of the things that they really learned, and it wasn't an easy lesson necessarily, but I think they talked about it, was, make sure you're all on the same page. If there's an editorial board and you're writing an editorial and it's supposed to be from the editors, make sure the voice that's coming out is representative of the folks that are in that room and not just 2 or 3 of the 4 or 5, right? It's really, really important if you're going to be a team to make sure that everybody in that team is represented, or has the potential to be represented, or the opportunity, I guess I should say.
It's true. Yeah, we got into the meeting and then they didn't even realize how they all felt about the same topic. And so that was a difficult meeting from their perspective.
Yeah. And there was an editorial that we didn't like, and it turned out that there was members of the editorial board that didn't appreciate the way it was written either. So it was sort of an interesting meeting.
Mm-hmm. Any other things that you can think of?
I've got one more thing. So you were talking about how with the prior read of things, and how if you see something, for example, you or Mr. Billerman or any faculty member might, or whoever gets to read it, I'm not sure, but whoever reads it, you see something about yourself or one of your colleagues that might be taken out of context that how would you know that something that a student said wasn't taken out of context in that case? Because like you said, prior read isn't something that really ever happens like in a real world setting. So how is it a student, for example, would what the student were being
Right.
felt something was not representative of them, they wouldn't get to
Correct.
do anything about it.
Yeah, that's an unfortunate part of life. I do read for context, or I try to, and I think there was a situation last year where there was a quote by Reed Margolis that I felt like was taken out of context because it didn't sound like something that Reed would agree with, the way it was, at least the context in which it was put into the article. And I don't think the writers felt that wasn't their intent, right? The way I read it, and Dr. Perry read it, and everybody else, adult read it, wasn't the way that they wrote it. You know what I'm saying? And so there's always going to be that. It's like, the danger of email, right? It's hard to read tone in email. Same thing with an article sometimes.
Yeah, that was the Speak editorial, and they were trying to give Reed a compliment, and they were trying to set him up like the next Martin Luther King sort of figure, and I don't remember how it was worded, but it was meant as a compliment, and almost every teacher that read the article, the editorial, took it as a negative comment about Reed. And to me, we all love Reed. Everyone in the room loved Reed, so we were like, wow, that was not how it was intended. So that was eye-opening, and it is good to show your articles before they're published to a lot of people, because unlike your other English classes or any other class really that you take here, it's going out for everyone to read. So if you're comfortable, show it to your friends, show it to your parents, show it to whoever you feel comfortable showing it to, because once it's out there, anyone can read it, and it's valuable feedback. Try not to be too emotional, just hear what people say, their first impression, because that's valuable. It may not come across as you intended it to, and that's really important. So, it's good. Mm-hmm.
And don't share our feedback with the general pop.
Right.
That happened. Someone took a screenshot of just a comment that I wrote when there was a quote, and it happened. I was interviewed about our role in your private lives, and it was after the whole JT thing, and I said, we're a community, and we don't want to be involved in your lives off campus. It's right at the school's purview, but if we have specific information, we are going to reach out to families to make sure that, if I have something that's credible, hey, here's what I've heard, now you deal with it. But it was something like, the goal of the administration is not to be overly involved in your personal lives. And that was pulled out and put into like brackets. And then between when I was interviewed and the publishing of that article, there was that whole thing in the fall. I don't even want to get into it. But
the situation.
And so now I say, well, now this quote seems really inflammatory and totally out of context. So I just said, it shouldn't be the one that's blown up. And it was okay in the article, right, in terms of where it was, but to pull it out. And I had written something in XF, and of course it was like screenshot and sent out to half the senior class, and then it just created this whole
mess.
Yeah.
It was sent just to the editors, and that's what Austin and Emmy were trying to tell us is, don't send out things. If you get something from an editor or a suggested change, it's not your place to forward that, because guess what? If you forward it, you're part of the situation then. So if there is a problem, it's going to go back to whoever forwarded the initial email. It was meant as just, hey, we need to meet and revise this because this quote needs to be put back in. What do you think we should pull out, or whatever the situation was? But it was taken out of context. Someone added something and then it went all around. And so be very careful with your phones, because once you hit send, that's on you. So just be aware of that. Serious matters can happen that way. Serious problems. Yep. Anything else?
I got nothing.
You got nothing?
I got nothing.
Speechless?
That's
Doesn't
fair.
happen very often. What time is it?
Ouch.
2:22 on August 28th.
Write it down. Should we write that down on our board?
We should.
Maddie's speechless.
I'll put that
Having a
under.
fun
I'll put
time.
that right underneath your
I'm
towel.
trying to be better, because one day, in like 10 minutes, she started tallying how many puns I had, and I had to stop. I'm like, oh, this is terrible. I'm worse than I thought. It's a disease. Okay, you write your own. I think that's all we have, right?
Great.
We're done? Thank you very much. Appreciate your
You're
time.
very welcome.
Thank you.
Oh, please. Thank you.
No standing ovation? Hank's the only one that clapped.
No golf clap?
Golf clap.
All right.
The camera died.